Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Whenever it is that you hear this message, I pray that you're poised to receive, to accept, and to respond to words of wisdom. Ashe. Um, one of the most crucial characters in Yoruba folklore and mythology is Ajapa, the tortoise, or Ijapa, or Alabaun. Right? All of these are referred to the tortoise, and he's a trickster, and as such, I laugh because everything about Ajapa is like all tricksters, right? He's brilliant and crafty and cunning and wildly talented and capable, but he is un like he cannot be reformed. He's always up to no good. 99.99% of the times when you see Ajapa in a story, he is up to no good, right? But he is still admirable because of the cunning. And you wonder, you want to believe, hey, this time maybe he's going to pull it off. Or it's like, I can't believe he came up with this scheme. And one of the best assessments I ever heard of Ajapa was from a Yoruba language. He was an English teacher somewhere here in the United States. His name is Oyewole, I think. Oyewole. May he rest in peace. But he wrote a whole book on Yoruba called Yoruba Trickster Tales. And I think in the introduction of the book, he describes Ajapa as the Yoruba ambiguity towards ego intelligence or something like that. So in other words, the Yoruba, in the social psychology of the people, are looking at people who are supremely intelligent and talented as this, entity that is, as I said, talented and capable on one hand, but suspicious on the other hand, because it's understood that a person who has these kinds of advantages is is dangerous, because do they have the discernment and the sort of the moral compass to use that advantage to not only their benefit but the benefit of others? In other words, are they going to be antisocial with their advantages, or are they really going to be altruistic and constantly working toward the good of themselves ultimately and the good of the community? And so Ajapa represents he's the embodiment of a cautionary tale. He's a cautionary entity, and he's always going to be doing something with his intelligence and his capabilities that is right antisocial. So he's constantly represents a warning. Don't misuse your talent. Don't misuse your ability. Right? And it's my own exploration of Ajapa, because I used to tell stories to children. So I got introduced to Ajapa mostly through stories, like folk tales. And then honestly, the more verses of Ifa I learned, then I started to get a better sense of where some of those stories came from, and then other stories. But the Ifa verses that feature Ajapa are totally consistent with folk tales. Okay, he has the same kind of a role. 99% of the time, he is up to no good, right? But always will have you laughing. Now, that has conditioned my thinking, though, in a certain way. And I want to share this particular lesson because I think it's going to be super helpful for people who are really more on the side of the Yoruba spiritual and religious tradition, not who are folklorists. And that is pertaining to the Awon Iyami Agba, Awon Iyami Aje, Awon Iyami Oshoronga, what people would commonly call the witches, right? Just like Ajapa is the embodiment of Yoruba ambiguity towards talent and intellect, ego intelligence, Awon Iyami represents the Yoruba ambiguity towards spiritual power, unharnessed, un bridled, um, maybe even informal spiritual power. That's how Awon Yami functions. They have an almost unlimited capacity to make things happen, right? In the school, we just had a real powerful Itadogun cycle, and it featured a story about a woman who was the mother of a warrior, and she was really powerful. And the warrior had all these charms, right? He had, like all warriors do, the Yoruba warriors have the physical charms, and they use incantations. It's about hardware, spiritual hardware that empowers someone. Whereas then his mother was, you know, didn't have to worry about any of that. She didn't have to make use of any kind of powders or charms or anything like that. Just with her own will, she could command things into existence. She could make things happen. She could do things and undo things. Right? It was a real full embodiment of the power and the expression of Awon Yami, but it was totally antisocial. Okay, it's totally antisocial. Everything that she was doing was in diametric opposition to what is good and what is um, uh, altruistic, what is social, what is progressive and desirable within a society or a group or a family, right? And I noticed that in those instances, a lot of people, most of us, struggle with accepting the fact that the Iyami are the embodiment of this power that is antisocial, right? And it's difficult because we all have mothers, or some of us are mothers. And so nobody has a neutral relationship with mothers. Whereas with a tortoise, some of us don't even know what a tortoise is, right? Okay, it's a turtle. What's the difference between a tortoise and a turtle? Some people have never touched a tortoise, never seen one live. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit easier, even though the tortoise is personified and he's acting like a man, right? He's a man, and in his all of his doings, he does things that men do, not human beings, but men. But it's easier for us to think of him in abstract terms and objectify the situation and extrapolate the lessons. But when it comes to the Awon Yami, people lose objectivity, and it's difficult to regain it. But it's really important that you do. It's really super important that you do, because you got to get the lesson. You got to understand, what do these figures, these characters represent? Not who you identify with, but what do they represent in the story, right? They represent the sharp edge of the knife. They represent the burning, hot, searing temperature of the fire. That's what they're there for in the story, to give you a very hardcore, like inescapable example of, this is what will happen if you misuse your spiritual powers, if you misuse your capabilities. Just like if you misuse your intellect, these are the detrimental outcomes that will happen. And it's expressed over and over and over and over and over, right? It isn't a to be taken as a indictment of masculinity or men or anything like that. That's not the point. The point is that these faculties and attributes and characteristics have a shadow, and it expresses itself in this way. Likewise, the Awon Yami are a very similar kind of an entity. These kinds of spiritual powers and capabilities have a shadow, or they actually are the embodiment of the spiritual shadow. And if you don't use them properly, they will have these kinds of outcomes. They will create these kinds of outcomes, right? So I want to encourage you to stretch your thinking and your analysis so that you don't continue to reinforce your biases. You don't continue to keep yourself in this psychological and emotional comfort zone, right? Where you're constantly saying that, well, because, this is a woman, there must be some explanation and justification for why she's doing all these, antisocial things, because women are naturally this, right? But that's the whole point. The whole point is that there is a shadow to the feminine expression, to what we may consider like mother wit, right? Or this female spirituality. There is a shadow, which is embodied by Awon Iyami, right? And the way you can kind of piece it together is that we have all these female deities who also have a shadow side. But when you see the shadow side of, say, Ashun, of Yemoja, of Olokun when he shows up as a female, you'll see that they fall into the category of what we see the Awon Iyami do in the different verses. The ways in which they use their powers on the shadowy side tends to be in alignment with or consistent with the behaviors and the actions of Awon Iyami. So what I'm trying to say is that the point of Awon Iyami in the pantheon is to embody the shadow. The shadow is not meant to be something warm and fuzzy. It isn't something that you're trying to make into goodness. That's the point of the shadow, is to acknowledge that there is another aspect. There's a whole other side to your consciousness. And it's antisocial. It's destructive, right? And by embracing that and acknowledging that that is an aspect of your consciousness, now you figure out how to integrate that. Not pretending that it's good, but recognizing it for its antisocial nature and outcomes, and reconciling that with what you really want to do and being deliberate and purposeful about doing things in a certain way and not in another way. Not pretending that it doesn't exist, not pretending that it isn't antisocial. All right. So that's the lesson for today, and it's a good one if you're willing to try it out. It's not something you're going to just adopt right away, but try it out. Just try it out, right? And you may have to go and read a couple of Ajapa stories to activate the mindset that I'm talking about, and then go back and read a couple of stories about the Awon Iyami, right? I will say that I would suggest you get my book, The Shadow Mothers, for the stories of Awon Iyami, because they're complete. That's this is a shameless plug for my own book, but also I want to emphasize that the stories that I share in the book Shadow Mothers are complete. A lot of times what I see people give in their accounts of the Iyami and what they do and how they came about is people cherry pick, and they chop out portions of stories, and they omit other very important aspects or parts of the story. Whereas in Shadow Mothers, you're going to get the whole thing from A to Z. The verse of Ifa and the entire narrative. Plus, there's pretty decent and thorough analysis of the stories and the symbolism as well. Either way, try listening to some Ajapa stories, reading some Ajapa stories, and then go back and explore the stories of Awon Iyami with the understanding that this isn't intended for you to overly identify with the character of the Iyami. It's intended for you to recognize who this entity represents, or what this entity represents in the awareness of the people. Okay? So, again, that's the lesson. I hope it's been helpful to you, and I'd look forward to your comments in the comment section below. Bye for now.